Okay, I'll call the East Lyme Board of Selectmen meeting to order. This is a special meeting for the purpose of budget review. It's February 15th, 2018. We start the meeting at 6 p.m. If you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. We all worked a long day and we have a long night ahead of us, so we'll just get right to it. Police is first up. That's a budget number 216 in our books, and folks, you are the very first budget that will be reviewed this year, past my office. So congratulations on moving to the top, Chief. Your first year here doing this, so we welcome you.
Thank you.
I know you spent some time with Sergeant Masick, and who's been putting these things together for a little while. So we appreciate both of you, your efforts, and now of course we have a full police commission that also reviewed the budget. So why don't you start us off on your police budget, which is 216? Is there anything that jumps up? Anything that we need to review?
We made every attempt to try to bring in a budget that maintained the services that we have without really increasing on those services. And we try to do it as fiscally responsible as possible, looking for places that we could cut back while also looking at places to better improve the efficiencies. And I think especially in the first year, recognizing some things that maybe have been long-term deficiencies and trying to fill those holes. So the budget that's presented to you, as you see, is ultimately just below 1% of a decrease. So there's not many items that are really jumping out. One thing that does go up, obviously, is a facility rental with the town of Waterford. We looked with the overtime for the administrative assistant to put that up a little bit. What we're finding is the full-time administrative assistant is taking a little more time off that's earned. We're having to fill that with the part-time assistant. So we're just trying to make sure we have enough money in that account to fund that. Additionally, from that, you'll see some other ones that go up slightly, but certainly would be open to or encouraged to have conversation and questions about what you see or have questions about.
Terrific. Obviously, we're losing the line item resident state trooper right at the top, which last year in the adopted budget was $105,000 and gone down to zero. We've paid that bill reluctantly, but finally. And thank you. You've done a pretty decent job of containing costs, which is very critical given the economic position the state's in, and therefore putting us in as we lose $1.5 million over the last year. Actually, more than that over the last 2 years. So, are there questions from the board? We'll start on the right, and then we'll go to the left. Or I'll just ask if there's any questions, Mr. Salerno.
No, the only thing that popped out was computer maintenance, and I just assumed that has to do with it.
That was based on reality of what we were experiencing. We pay a portion into what Mr. Bergaw pays for on the public works side. We were trending a whole lot higher with our usage of having to have STAR come in and do maintenance or to troubleshoot problems in the system. Everything we do, understanding, is networked, and the network we have for our records management and dispatch system, it's housed up at the dispatch center. It networks down to the police department where officers work on those reports as well as out to the cars. So there's a lot of volatility. On that note, we have asked STAR to put together a quote for doing an overall evaluation of our systems to really see, are we doing things the most efficient way possible? What is the replacement schedule? So really trying to do some long-term planning with our computers, because our networks are probably one of our most critical infrastructure that we have. Okay.
And training, I remember last year there was talk about training. What are you trending at this year?
This year we are just a little bit under where we should be. What we're trying to do is bring ourselves up to where we should be, especially in some of the areas of specialties. I'll give you an example of accident reconstruction. The department has one accident reconstructionist. What we're trying to do is get into a cooperative agreement with Waterford, New London, and also bring at least a second person on as a reconstructionist, so we can do this as a regional team effort. But some of those specialties and where we kind of have some volatility is we have some senior members of the department that have specialized training who also can retire at any moment. So for our long-term stability, we really need to coach up and train up some of the younger members of the department in some specialized area, being accident reconstruction, active shooter, areas such as that. So we're providing what we can to the residents and making sure that when somebody leaves, we have somebody pick that ball up and keep going.
Okay, and the number you put in there you think is sufficient for what you need?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, we definitely think that's sufficient.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mrs. Hardy?
Line item 5515, the overtime for the boat duty.
Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to fill all the shifts this
We were.
past summer?
We've had no problems with doing that, and, you know, that has been both the regional boat with Waterford, but also our own town boat. We've tried to cut back a little on the town boat with more on the regional boat, and it has worked out fairly well this year. We've got nothing but accolades from residents about the visibility and the activity that's taking place out there, so.
And that includes weekends as well as some during the week
It does,
coverage?
yes. We've tried to maintain the boats being out there on the weekend in conjunction with Waterford, but also really kind of not making a pattern during the week, so the boat does get out sporadically at different times, so the people on the river and the people that are, the residents, are noticing the police boat more and more at varied times. Obviously, we don't want to get into a pattern where it's only out at certain times and people know, all right, the police boat's not going to be out here.
I think that perhaps some people that have questioned are thinking that we're not on duty because they're seeing the Waterford boat
Okay.
and thinking that it's, you know, that we're not covering and
Sure.
Waterford is.
And many times, you know, the regional boat will have, you know, one of our officers, but sometimes it may have two of our officers. It's, you know, we work that scheduling with Waterford to maintain, you know, that, and sometimes it's a work between Sergeant Masick and Lieutenant Burton of Waterford to really make sure that somebody or two people are on that boat at all times.
So we try to, like I've explained in the past, have one-in-one. That's how we initially sit down prior to the season beginning and work out the schedule for the entire boating season. But again, sometimes there's an issue where we can't fulfill our obligation that particular shift, so Waterford will try to get a second body from theirs and vice versa. And we are right on par with that current account as we go on through the end of this fiscal year. So we're at 1/4 of that left, which should get us right up to the beginning again.
Okay, and on line item 514, the overtime, I noticed that shows a reduction from 2017, which was the actual expenditure was $334,000, and you're budgeting 307.
Yes.
300, which is still under what the actual was for 2017.
Right, and I think in 2017, there were some anomalies with officers being out lunch, things that you couldn't plan for. So I believe that expenditure was coming back, asking for more money to be put into that line. So it wasn't the actual budgeted amount. This year, if you notice, we're trending at 62% in overtime. So we're pretty much right on the mark of where we should be. Looking at that, an increase, some of the areas that I see more overtime that's possibly needed is investigations, narcotic-type investigations, surveillance, and what it takes to actually get some of those things accomplished. But, you know, I think we've done a good job this year of keeping a hold on overtime, but knocking on wood, anomalies such as officer injuries, long-term sicknesses, are things that can't be planned for, which I think was what happened in 2017 and looking back.
Okay. We had also discussed at a previous meeting about increasing the fee for companies' use of vehicles.
Yes.
So, and where is that reflected?
That's not reflected inside of the budget because that's I would have to ask Ms.
That'll be in the revenue account?
That would be. It doesn't go into the operating budget.
It's a special account.
It's in CNRE.
Okay. To go towards vehicle purchase?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, and I think, I had another question here. No, I think that's it. I'll pass for right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Siri?
I'm good.
Mr. Cunningham?
Just a couple things. I see you have at line 331, scheduling software. Is there something new that was needed because we went to our own?
Well, it's the software that is currently in use is In Time Solutions. It is well past its serviceability life. This would be to upgrade to the system that is now current, because right now, if this system were to crash, there would be no scheduling software available because there's no service on this, there's no maintenance. It's I think about 10 years old, if not more. The new system that we're asking or looking to upgrade to allows us a whole lot more options than we currently have. It allows online scheduling. It allows us to be able to, through the use of this system, schedule officers. Officers remotely can put in for time off. Eventually, the thought, and this is beyond us into the finance department, it also allows an integration to the payroll system. So it puts us, more to the future of being able to do things that are paperless, saving time and making more efficient use of our officers, and especially the supervisor's time of having to do time cards. So to me, this is kind of a down the road vision also, but there is a very current need because, again, if the software right now were to crash, we would be using paper and pen to actually do schedules.
So it's really, it's an investment in efficiency.
I believe so, yes.
And just one other question.
Question.
We didn't have a towing expense before. What is
No,
that for? Like-
basically, that was something that unfortunately would come out of operating wherever they would find the need. The example of this is in an investigation where we have to seize a vehicle, be it narcotics or motor vehicle accident. We incur the cost of towing that vehicle to the Waterford PD to impound that vehicle. That was something where my belief in the past was the bill would come in, the resident trooper would make a decision of which line to take it out of. In the spirit of transparency, I wanted to have it in the budget so we can see it is an actual expense. Unfortunately, it's one that we have no ability to determine how many times we're going to use it. We've used it twice now since July 1st. We could use it 5 times more, or we could not use it again. It's certainly no way to predict how many times you're going to use that. So that figure was just to make sure we had something in there that was sufficient to do a couple times.
Thank you. That's it for me.
Yeah, the facility rental line, 201, we haven't encumbered any money on that this year at all. Is it, we just haven't got billed from Waterford yet? We're asking for a 4.8% increase, and we haven't spent the dime
Well,
yet.
that's a contractual. So the contract with Waterford calls for that increase, so that's exactly what it is. I don't know as far as the billing.
Just haven't got a bill from them yet?
No, actually, I've got that in the back of my mind. I have to find out if we're just to pay it because we have a contract with them.
Or if you get a bill.
They're probably not going to invoice us. I think we should probably just send a check in good faith.
Yeah. The same thing with the mobile radio service. We've only spent 10% of this year's budget, and we're at, so it's,
Yeah.
once again, contract.
Nope,
pay when
yeah,
the bill comes
what it
in.
is, that's with CROG, so the Council of Governments, they oversee the in-car mobile data terminals. I made a decision when we started, we were going to look to see if we were gonna stay with that system or move to another, so we didn't pay the bill. We just got the bill last week, and we're gonna be paying that, so you'll see that one-time expenditure go away.
And finally, radio maintenance, same thing, contract. We haven't spent any money yet.
Yep.
And,
Well, actually, the radio maintenance in the current budget, I believe that was one of the areas we gave back.
okay,
If
I'm sure there's been a lot.
did.
Yeah,
what we've
that
had
was
to do
one
this
we
year.
actually zeroed out by giving money back to the town.
And the only other thing is, line item 326, you've spent 90% of your 27.5 budget, and you're only asking for another 1,000, so hopefully you got most of your training done.
Yeah, and most of that encompasses buying ammunition, taser parts for training. So a lot of that we will buy in bulk early in the year, have that on hand to go through the training for the year, so that should be okay.
Overall, a decrease of 0.8% is very good. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Dago. It's great having you. It's great having a chief finally, which will just give us this consistency year after year on the budgets, but also give us vision for the future. And I know our police commission, I'm biased, I do, I sit on the police commission, but let's talk about what this budget will look like a year, 2 years, 5 years from now. I know we have officer needs. I know there's a real stress point we're hitting, that we're carrying 22, 23 officers in a town our size, with our population, with our activity, with the calls that are coming in, really indicate 30 on the low side. Is there a plan in place? Is there something, if nothing else, I want to prepare this board and Board of Finance in discussions and planting the seed that this department does need to grow just to meet the needs of the calls coming in now.
And quite honestly, we do more with less. And our officers are out there on a daily basis trying to make sure they fulfill the mission that they're given, but we're doing it with less staff than we actually should be doing it with. We understand the fiscal realities. Right now, the Police Commission is undertaking a study of staffing to look at staffing needs, where we should be. We've asked the police commission to really make this a long-term goal, and we'll be working closely with them to try to develop that so we can bring forward a plan to say, this is where we should be and why we should be there. We don't want to just haphazardly throw out that we need to hire officers. We want to know why and what that goal is going to be and what that's going to look like. Because certainly, in the atmosphere, as you look at some of the surrounding departments, you look at population versus officers per thousand, we're very, very low compared to a lot of our neighboring towns. So that's something we're taking a look at. The other issue that we see is we have now 5 officers that have the ability to retire at any point. That's certainly concerning for us that 4 of those are supervisory staff, that if those officers decide to leave, we have to have some plans, because we all know replacing an officer that leaves is not an overnight situation. Sometimes, especially if you have to send somebody to the academy, you're talking about a year time frame until that person is really a beneficial employee to work on the road by themselves. So I think part of this staffing study has to be that long-term evaluation of who can go, how we can do that replacement, including how we do promotions to supervisor, because that's something that's obviously needed in our department.
If you had 2, we've had this conversation, but for the record, if you had 2 officers tomorrow, 2 extra officers, 2 more to put on, would that reduce your overtime? How would that affect?
No,
What would be the effect of that?
I am not a believer in saying that adding officers reduces overtime. You have to get to the threshold of about 6 officers to do that. I think if we were to bring officers on right now, and we were lucky enough to get 2, looking at areas of need in the community. 2 of the biggest complaints that I receive as chief are traffic and narcotics.
Yeah.
Looking at those issues to say, could we dedicate somebody to traffic enforcement all the time? And if somebody calls in one neighborhood today because they have a concern about traffic and speeding or whatever it may be, assign that officer. Because right now the problem is the call volume becomes so voluminous, officers on patrol get very, very little time to spend on traffic enforcement. They may sit on the side of the road for 2 minutes and get called to another call. Well, now they're not able to get back to that for several hours sometimes, if ever, on that shift.
Yeah.
Having a dedicated traffic officer certainly allows us to work more efficiently and address the needs of the citizens. Same thing with narcotics. Right now, we've had conversations and an agreement with the Regional Community Enhancement Task Force for narcotics. But right now, staffing doesn't allow us to really get somebody. We're working on that, but it would be nice to have somebody that we could dedicate full-time rather than a patrol officer who's working 4 days on the road, 1 day with the task force, which the continuity really isn't there.
Less effective. Thank you very much. Any other questions on this particular budget? We'll move on, because I believe you're still up at the podium when we talk about animal control and maybe even dispatch.
Yep.
So 226 is animal control. As you all know and remember, this is a shared service, if you will, a regionalization of services. Currently with Waterford, there is discussion about, the operations side will still be Waterford, but the shelter, the facility, I'm in negotiations with New London and possibly Montville to bring one shared facility. You'll have that in front of you should those discussions and conversations go in a positive direction relatively shortly. And we'll have a decision on that. Our facility, shelter now is not adequate, below standard, subpar. Right now, we have a full-time ACO. This bill gets cut in half. Don't forget, Waterford pays for 50% of this, Anna, right down the line.
50% of all the wages and anything that has to do
Benefits. And
anything that has to do with the ACO. So they would also pay for half of the uniforms and training.
okay, great. So, Chief, maybe you could run through this and point out any anomalies or increases or decreases for us.
In this budget, again, tries to maintain status quo. Currently, we have the full-time ACO. We have a part-time ACO. One thing that we are investigating in the coming year is moving towards also adding a per diem. That will not increase your costs at all. What happens right now is your full-timer works during the day. The part-timer covers call every night, plus weekends, holidays. So it's a lot to ask of a part-time person. So we're trying to give her some relief by maybe bringing on a per diem employee. But again, that's not going to be seen in a cost increase because that money would come out of that part-time line. Really, it's a status quo budget. The only thing that we did have ACO ask for an increase is in veterinary services because of what was experienced, I guess, the year before. So.
We don't have it identified
Yeah,
in your
I
budget.
don't either.
I don't know where that money was coming from, if that was Waterford's expense at the time.
I believe that's, at that time, the process was with Waterford, and I believe that they had some sort of a donation fund that was used for this purpose.
Which is fairly depleted, and all the goodwill that went into that over there is kind of being minimized now. So these are pretty accurate costs. So right now you're at $5,000 this year, and we think we'll go right past that.
Well, again, right now it's trending for a little bit low. This increase is based on a request from the ACO, but based on that 2017 where they were. So we'd have to really take a look at those numbers to make an evaluation of that.
Okay. Other questions?
I have a question.
Sure, Mr. Solano.
The telephone, that pays for a cell phone for the full-time ACO?
Yes.
Okay, and what about the part-time ACO?
So what they've done, they've requested a phone, and at this point, because of budget and cuts, I declined to have the part-timer get their own cell phone. So what we're doing now is, when the full-timer gets off duty, that cell phone is then transferred to the part-timer, so I can receive call-outs, and then have that access to that phone while she is on duty.
Okay, because I had an issue over the summer, and it was a hard time. I had to leave a message, and then she was on the road, and she had to go back and then make calls. It was really inefficient, and I
Right, so
wanted to
this
bring it
is,
up because
this
I
is how
didn't.
we combated that issue,
Okay.
without spending more money.
Okay,
It was
so the
basically-
phone stays at the job, and then, because
Correct.
they're usually not on at the same time, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that will,
Alleviate that
great,
problem.
because that was not
That's the goal.
efficient. That was bad. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Sergeant. Dispatch. We go back to 215. Now, as you know, when you're looking at all these numbers, we a year ago separated dispatch from emergency management, as dispatch became the control and under the supervision of our police department. And with that came a significant increase in responsibilities of our dispatch when we went independent. A specific upgrade in quality in what they needed to produce as a dispatch unit, and I'm proud to say we're making great progress there. We're hitting the marks where we need to hit, and every day we make more progress. So if you could go over the dispatch budget, I think we're kind of getting an idea of what dispatch is costing now.
Certainly.
I think a year ago we were really kind of shaky because it really was folded into the EMD, the Emergency Management Department, and now we've really separated it out, and we've had a good handle on it.
Historically, the way that dispatch has been operated and staffed has been continues to be heavily reliant on part-time staff. We currently have 4 full-time dispatchers with a large cadre of part-time dispatchers. Part-time dispatchers currently work the 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift, Monday through Friday, as well as 2 on days, Saturday and Sunday, 2 on evening Saturday and Sunday, and 1 on the overnight shift Saturday and Sunday. So theoretically, on a weekend day, you have 40 hours per day of part-time hours that we're funding. And also during the week, that's an extra 20 hours. In looking at the calls for service, the busiest times, we've identified those as being 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning, as well as 3 and 4 in the afternoon. To combat that, what we've asked is we have put in for 2 additional full-time dispatchers. There's an industry standard in theory that you really need to have 2 dispatchers on duty at all times. This really isn't a need that really should have come with the independent police department. This is a standard practice that really, is a long time coming. Understanding our dispatchers are the PSAP, which means they answer all 911 calls in the town of East Lyme. They dispatch fire and EMS, and with those, especially the EMS side, they're required by state law to do EMD, which is emergency medical dispatching. So one dispatcher is on the phone with whoever may call, working that person through the medical care they may need to give until first responders arrive at that scene. The issue with having only one dispatcher, if you can imagine, taking more than one 911 call, doing EMD, having other calls for service for police, fire, EMS come in, it's virtually impossible for one person to do those tasks. So from a safety standpoint, we look at that to say it's not the best standard practice for us to be operating on. And it really opens us up to some liability, but also some points of failure. And my job and my view is to try to eliminate the points of failure, to identify them and see what course of action we need to take. So one of the first things we identified is in dispatch, really needing to better staff that center. A couple things, so looking forward to this, or looking at this budget, we have put in for 2 additional full-time dispatchers. The thought process is to put an additional dispatcher Monday through Friday, 7 to 3. That will eliminate 20 hours of part-time and allow us to move that to another area in our schedule. And if we were to get the 6th dispatcher, put that dispatcher on the midnight shift Monday through Friday. Because right now, again, at 11 p.m., you go down to 1 dispatcher until 7 a.m. So we're really trying to ensure that we're giving the citizens of our town the best possible dispatch coverage, because ultimately the job that they do impacts the police, fire, and EMS, because they can't get out to their calls without the proper dispatching taking place. So again, back to the budget, the 2 full-time dispatchers are imperative to proper operations, to making sure that we are providing that service the best we can. You'll see an increase in part-time dispatchers. Right now, where we were trending with those 20 hours a week was showing that we were a little bit over. However, if we were to go to 6 full-time dispatchers and looking to go 2 dispatchers around the clock, we would have to add part-time dispatchers, a second part-time dispatcher, Saturday and Sunday on the midnight overnight shifts. So kind of moving 20 hours and moving that over to 16 hours on that side of things. Right now, the overtime, if you look at the current budget, the overtime is at its maximum. The reason that is, and what we're running into, is the heavy reliance on part-timers. There are some great people, dedicated people, but unfortunately, every time you deal with part-time dispatchers, you have ebbs and flows of availability. The staffing issue we run into is when we don't have a part-timer available, we have to fill that with a full-time dispatcher. That's at the overtime rate rather than the part-time rate. So we have that kind of tug of war that happens. So right now, we're trending a little high on the overtime portion, but hopefully bringing on a 5th dispatcher sometime soon, we'll be able to bring that part-time dispatch line way down within budget.
Your budget's for 5 dispatchers, correct? This number, 466, is that for 5 full-time dispatchers?
6.
It's for all 6?
That was asking for the 5th and the 6th. Yep.
Oh, okay. The last year's number, Anna, please back me on this or correct me on this, that we only budgeted for 4 full-time dispatchers in last year's number.
That's right.
And then we said, whoops, we had already promised and made a commitment going independent. We need 4.5. And we never budgeted for the 4.5. So we're still kind of scrambling for that money, and we have a plan, and what's coming up next is, or soon, is, of course, we have Mr. Morris's retirement, and that savings, what we'd like to do with that savings is move it over to dispatch. That's how we're keeping our budget, the bottom line, at the end of the day, flat, is by finding and identifying problems, finding the solutions to them through moving things around. So your budget asks for 6.
Yes, correct.
And your budget will also put 2 people on in every shift on the weekends. And that's included in this budget.
This